All right, party people, welcome to the blood unit. And here's the deal. There's a few kind of stumbling blocks along the way, but for the most part, the basics of the blood unit should be pretty easy. So let's get started. We're going to have blood disorder projects they're going to be working on. And so when we get to any of these within these notes, I'm going to skip through them pretty quickly because you're going to be getting that information on Haiku through somebody's blood disorder project. And so here's all the basics that you already probably know. The one thing that you might not think about is how blood is also taking fluid and waste from the tissues and not just delivering it to the tissues. So that's one thing that could be easily forgotten or mistaken. There's everything that is making up your blood, obviously not just red blood cells, and that makes a very good point that's important to remember is that the cellular parts of the blood on the bottom half there, cellular components, are only 45% of the total blood volume. Plasma is most of it, and of that plasma, 90% of it is water. As you can see, proteins and other nutrients in there. When you donate blood plasma, it's actually the proteins that they're usually after, and those proteins are helping to clot the blood. And as you'll see in the disorder projects, a lot of people have conditions where their blood doesn't clot correctly. And it's also helpful for surgeries. If you're ever watching these TV shows or movies where they're performing surgeries on people, they will often give these people clotting factors so they don't bleed out on the surgical table. So here's the basic blood composition stuff. Again, there's 45% of your blood is the cellular components called hematocrit. Anything with the HEM is talking about, is for that suffix heme, is talking about blood, and then the rest is plasma. We don't care how much blood you have, but you will care if you go to give blood at school or anywhere else one day. There's the shape of the red blood cell. It has that little divot in there. That little divot is on both sides. It's basically like a little rubber raft or a donut that hasn't gotten its hole punched through all the way. And that increases the surface area. So more surface area means more ability to hold oxygen, which is obviously one of its most important jobs. And there's the oxygen binding molecule, hemoglobin, which has two parts. And there you can see the actual sort of globular shaped, which is why it's named that, protein that's hanging out outside the red blood cell that's hanging onto those little blue oxygen molecules. Here's a picture of cyanosis, which is a condition when the blood does not have a lot of oxygen. It's a little bit darker colored and appears a little bit more blue or purple through the skin. Here's your typical red blood cell count, stuff that will be helpful in like a case study if you're doing that stuff. You'll see in a minute. And here's the production of red blood cells, or erythrocytes. The name for that is hematopoiesis. It happens in the red bone marrow, which we talked about in the skeletal system. The hormone that is secreted by the kidneys is called erythropoietin, and that's what's going to tell the red bone marrow to start producing more red blood cells. Why would that be? Because they're getting destroyed all the time. They're getting damaged all the time, and so you're constantly replacing them. It is also the case for these cheaters, Lance Armstrong, that think it's a good idea to go up in the mountains where there's less oxygen and train for a long period of time, which causes their body to make more red blood cells, and then they come down. But before they come down and do their competition, they take those red blood cells out and store them, and right before their competition re-inject themselves with their own blood. But their own blood, that's sort of boosted up on oxygen and making it easier for them to be successful in their competition. Here's some other stuff that's involved in red blood cell production, things that you need to have in your body in higher amounts. And so if you're pregnant, for example, or your wife is pregnant, the doctor will tell you to take these vitamins and minerals because it's going to help you to maintain a higher level of blood for your circulation, which is important for you, your wife, and your baby. Anemia is something you hear a lot, and that is the condition where there are not enough red blood cells or not enough hemoglobin. Essentially, there's not enough oxygen getting to the tissues, and so the tissues cannot perform correctly. And here are some different types of anemias down below. There's a typical lifespan of a red blood cell. You can see they don't really last too long. They're squishing through single file through a capillary and potentially getting stuck to other things, which causes them to get destroyed in the liver and the spleen. And so they just always need to be replaced. And that's where the erythropoiesis and the poietin hormone are involved to make more of them. Here again is more of the hemoglobin stuff and what's getting destroyed, I guess. And so there's two parts again to that molecule, but when the heme breaks down, it forms iron and this protein complex called biliverdin, which is green, and you see green or yellowish green components in bile or saw in the digestive system, and we'll see it when we dissect at the end of the year. And the iron is reused, and the biliverdin is converted to bilirubin, which is excreted in bile. So there's a whole complete circle, or going back to the digestive system. Don't want to ruin too much jaundice information, but having to do with bilirubin excess. There are some normal levels, which is something I'm not going to ask you to memorize certainly, but you should understand how the difference between normal and abnormal levels. And so I've given you some case studies to help you work on that, and there's actually a separate subpage in our unit that you can go visit to go through these case studies on your own. And then here are some blood disorders and conditions, and again, if you download the PowerPoint and play it, these will pop up kind of one at a time so you can quiz yourself. All blood cells start off as something called a hemocytoblast. Again, heme is blood and cyto is just talking about cyto, like cytoplasm, and blast is a builder, just like we saw in the skeletal unit. And so here's a good lineage picture that shows you where they all kind of come from. And two separate categories, main categories being the myeloids are the cells that stem from myeloid, and the only cell that stems from a lymphoid, which is the lymphocyte, and we'll talk about more of those in the next unit when we talk about the lymphatic system. Here's the way that white blood cells get out to your tissues. So for example, if you skin your knee or scrape your finger open, the white blood cells are coming to that area to make sure that there are no infections or no foreign matter that's getting in. And so those white blood cells, you can see, squeeze through the teeny tiny cracks in the capillary and make their way out to the tissues where they can be helpful, and that is called diapedesis. That's also where the white pussy nastiness comes from when you get a scab or an injury like that, because those white blood cells are releasing lots of stuff to try to maintain homeostasis, and that maintenance comes along with a white pussy substance. Sorry if that grosses you out when I say white pussy substance, but it's pretty cool. Here are the two categories of white blood cells, the granulocytes and agranulocytes, and what that means is that they have these little dots inside of them, or not, granules or no granules, and that those granules are little lysosomes that are full of enzymes that can destroy stuff, and that's where the white pussy stuff comes from. And there are three types of granulocytes. They are all Phils. So think of that friend that you have that's named Phil. He's a granulocyte. He's got lots of maybe pimples or something, little dots. And the agranulocytes are actually cytes, lymphocytes and monocytes. So pretty easy to remember the categories, but easy to confuse if you don't take the time to do it. Here are the neutrophils. I'm not going to go through all the details because you can just read through these. But you should know what they look like. So you have a good worksheet that allows you to color them. You should know how many are in a normal white blood cell count. Just pick a number, like for instance 60% or 55%. Pick one number that's in that range. And you'll see that they have lots of lobes in their nucleus. Anywhere from 2 to 5 is normal. More than that is abnormal. So that's another thing you can look for abnormal structures. And you should know their functions. And there's that pus again. Look at that wonderful pus. Eosinophils they have orange granules, and so that's unique for them. And there's their, 2% of them should exist on a plate of blood cells or blood. Those are their functions, and again, those granules are full of enzymes, so they can destroy stuff like parasites. Basophils, dark purple, the smallest amount of any. Neutrophils are the biggest, basophils are the smallest. There's their functions. Allergies is one of the big ones. You probably have heard of antihistamine. Well, that's going to decrease blood flow, and if you decrease blood flow, you're also decreasing the amount of extra stuff that is there. And so when you get like drainage, post-nasal drip, and some cold symptoms, that's helping with that to reduce the blood flow, reducing the other stuff. It's not necessarily the blood that's the problem; it's the extra stuff that's there. It's annoying to you. Here are the monocytes. So pick a number like 6%, 6 for monocytes. They have a kidney-shaped nucleus, and they're humongous. And here's their, and again, we'll talk about more of these when we get to the lymphatic system. These are non-specific immunity, something that doesn't mean a whole lot now, but will mean a whole lot in the next unit. Here are the lymphocytes. They are teeny tiny, and the nucleus is still about the same size as a typical nucleus, but the rest of the cytoplasm is very much reduced. And so they are about the size of a red blood cell. They're about the size of the nucleus of a white blood cell. And so if you just remember 30%, you should be good for that. And there's their function. Long-term specific immunity. This would be an example of someone that gets the chickenpox. They develop immunity to it, and they are immune to chickenpox for the rest of their lives because of that. And there are some exceptions, like shingles and stuff, but that's the exception. There's two types of lymphocytes, the B cells and the T cells, and we're going to go into way more details of these next unit. But for now, all you need to know is the B cells produce antibodies, and the T cells recognize those signals and go around and just destroy stuff. So they're the killers. AIDS is a very specific type of T cell that is attacked and destroyed by the virus, and so if your T cells are being destroyed, you have no way to defend yourself, or reduced mechanism of defending yourself, your immune system. And here is a picture of a lot of those cells that you should recognize. They're kind of small, but you have good pictures on your worksheets that you're going to color, so no need to worry about that. And I'm actually going to stop this video right here.